In 2024, the Healy administration signed the Affordable Homes Act, and they did this in an effort to alleviate the crushing housing crisis that residents of Massachusetts have been under when it comes to inventory and affordability. This act gives homeowners by right the ability to build an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, on their property with fewer regulations, zoning requirements, that sort of thing, as long as it abides by building code and a few other criteria. And the hopes of doing this, like I said, is to alleviate the housing crisis that the residents are currently under. Hi, my name is Sarah Delacondro, and I'm a real estate agent in Eastern Massachusetts. I help buyers and sellers, investors, builders with all of their real estate needs. So if you're planning a move in 2026, get in touch. Let's talk. It's never too early to start the conversation. And if you like this video, you get a little bit of value out of it, go ahead and hit that thumbs up and subscribe and hit that little bell so you get notified whenever a new video drops. My goal is to hit 1,000 followers by the summertime. And the more followers I get, the more I'm able to push this content out to buyers and sellers throughout the state and throughout the country. So every little bit helps, and I'd be forever grateful for it. All right, let's get started. So what's an ADU? An accessory dwelling unit can be either a separate structure or part of the main structure that resides on the lot of the principal house. So think of like a detached garage, and you could potentially build an accessory dwelling unit out of it. Think of your basement. If it meets certain building codes, you can make that basement an accessory dwelling unit. Certain criteria this ADU has to have, and that is it needs to have its separate entrance, whether it's directly to the outdoors or to like a hallway or a mudroom or something like that. Also, it can't be more than 900 square feet or half of the gross living area of the principal home. So these ADUs are on the smaller side. However, there's nothing limiting the number of bedrooms or bathrooms that this ADU can have, unless, of course, the ADU is connected to a septic system, and that septic system will determine, how many bedrooms, because we know septic systems are based upon bedrooms. If the main home is, 3 bedrooms and the septic is a 3-bedroom home, then you have to come up with an alternative for the bathroom, whether it's building another septic if you have room for another septic system, or hooking up to sewer if there is sewer on the street. But whatever the case is, the ADU still needs to abide by certain safety, structural, sanitation, building codes. Now, the big question is, can cities and towns set their own sort of limitations or setback zoning requirements? And the answer is yes and no. Cities and towns can set some limitations. However, they must be permissive. They must be somewhat lenient. And in essence, they can't really infringe or make building an ADU impossible. So cities and towns essentially have to allow homeowners to build an ADU on the property, whether they like it or not. One question I get asked a lot is, if I have a 2-family home, can I build 2 accessory dwelling units? And the answer is no. 1 accessory dwelling unit per principal home on the property. So if you have 1 principal home, whether it's a single family, 2-family, 3-family, you can only build 1 ADU, even if you have plenty of room to build, other ADUs. If you want to build more property on your land, that's a whole different video of subdividing your property and yada, yada, yada. But this video here just references ADUs. So 1 ADU per principal home on each property. Another question I get asked a lot is, does the ADU have to be for a family member? And can you charge rent for these ADUs? And the answer is no and yes. So no, an ADU does not have to be for a family member. Think like in-law apartment. And yes, you can charge rent. However, depending on what your city and town has for rental in terms of like short-term or long-term rental, you do have to abide by those regulations within the city or town. So yes, you can rent it out. If you're looking for short-term rental or Airbnb, check with your city and town. And no, it does not have to be for a family member. Now, the pros of having an ADU is that you build more housing. And in Massachusetts, we need more housing. We don't have enough housing for the people that are living here. And because of that, inventory is always super low. And because of that, home prices have skyrocketed. Think supply and demand. If there's a greater demand than there is supply, values naturally go up. Another pro for having ADU is the ability of a homeowner to create more income. So if you have, a detached garage that is not doing anything, is no longer serving a purpose, well, then you can turn that into an ADU. Or maybe you have enough room in your basement that by building code, you can turn it into an ADU and create a little bit more income. This makes it possible for people who are on fixed income, older or seniors who, want to live in town, but taxes and prices and things are going up and up and up, and it's harder for them to do that. There is potential for additional income with an ADU in a basement or something that's detached. Another pro of having an ADU is for our aging family members. Maybe you have parents that no longer can live on their own, but you don't want to put them in assisted living or in a nursing home. Well, perhaps building an ADU on your property is that sort of good in between, right? They still have their independence, they still have their privacy, they still have their own entrance, they can still come and go as they please, yet they're close enough to their children, or children are close enough to their parents, where there's always someone there in case something should happen, and the other way around. Parents who have children that are, starting their life, and like I said, home prices have gone crazy through the roof. Maybe they can't afford to buy a single family on their own at this time. Well, an ADU is a perfect solution for that. Now, with every pro, there are cons. And some of the cons to ADU is noise factor, for one thing. The more people that you have, the more noise naturally you're going to have. There's a greater demand on our town services like sanitation services, trash pickup, schools, roads. Also, with ADUs, you're making your neighborhoods denser. And in neighborhoods that are already somewhat dense, you're just adding to it. My parents live in Massachusetts, and their street is a pretty densely populated street with a narrow road. So if if there are 30 homes on that street and all 30 homes build an ADU, that is potentially 30 extra cars that you would have on that street, right? Because most times, most people are going to need a car, which brings me to one of the guidelines with ADUs. If an ADU is built within a certain distance of public transportation, you do not need to provide a parking spot for that ADU. If it is not, however, then you do need to provide a parking spot. And there's nothing to say how many parking spots you need to provide. You can provide one little hatch for one car, and whether the people living in that ADU have 2 cars or 3 cars, well, that's on them to find parking for the other cars. So an ADU adds to the densely populated neighborhoods that are through most of Massachusetts. So whether you consider that a con or not depends on where you live and your threshold for the densely populated areas that make up, most of Greater Boston. And that brings me to a very important point. Now, when it comes to ADUs, this applies to the 350 cities and towns that are in Massachusetts. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, you are correct. Boston is exempt from this portion of the Affordable Homes Act. And the reason why is because Boston has its own ADU guidelines criteria that the Healy administration does not want to mess with. So this Affordable Homes Act applies to 350 cities and towns in Massachusetts and not 351. Boston is exempt. Okay, that's your rundown of the Affordable Homes Act and the ADU portion of that, how that affects Massachusetts. Now, I think ADUs are a great idea because it does solve several problems. However, we need to be thoughtful and intentional with where we build these ADUs. But you really can't make guidelines that are so stringent because that won't abide by what the Healy administration has decided to make its guidelines. And you can't say, well, your yard is too small, your yard is too big, this neighborhood is too dense. Guidelines don't allow cities and towns to regulate it as such. So as much as I think it's a great idea to help with the burden of inventory, to help with aging parents, young families, to help generate more income, it will add to the density of many neighborhoods in and around Greater Boston. I do think ADUs are a good idea. I don't think that they're a good idea for every homeowner, but we don't have the authority to determine that. So we'll see where it goes with that. Thanks so much for stopping by. Like I said, if you got a little bit of value out of this video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. And if you want to learn more about what's going on in Massachusetts in real estate, you're looking to make a move in Massachusetts, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and that little bell so you get notified whenever a new video drops. My goal is to hit 1,000 followers. So if you can help me with that, I would be forever grateful. Thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.